On today's episode, we are joined by our guest, Dave Smith from the Will and Dave podcast. And we'll learn about how it's better to kill children than for them to be adopted. We'll get a Canadian's take on the Keystone pipeline and the Canadian healthcare system. Learn that all of the world's suffering can be solved with money. And finally discover that free market capitalism, not socialism, is the root cause of the baby formula shortage. This is Cringe Posts. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Cringe Post podcast. This is the podcast where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we see in our feeds each week. We break down where they went wrong, point out some of the underlying assumptions, and try to have a bit of a laugh along the way. My name is Britt, and today my co-host Donnie, he's not in. He actually caught some sort of cold. Maybe it's COVID, maybe it's not. We don't know. But he's doing good, but his voice is a little bit gravelly. So I opted to have my good friend Dave Smith on. Dave and I met a long time ago. I was used to touring a rock and roll band, still play a little bit, but not as much. And he actually would house us, and we became fast friends. And he's had us over at his house quite a bit. And we also fell in love with like business and all these different things together. And I really look up to Dave, and I'm excited to have him on. Dave, do you want to kind of introduce yourself and maybe plug any of the stuff that you're working on?
Well, yeah, I'm Dave Smith. We've been friends, as you said, for a while. And one of the stories, which we'll get into a little bit later, is how you were at my house, and I think three of the four members almost died at my house. And
Yes.
We'll get into that story a little bit later. There's a lot of history of politics, a lot of our conversations until 1-3 in the morning that we've talked over business and politics and whatnot. So I'm sure we'll have a good time this evening. My plugs is anything which makes you think is a good thing. And I'm sure that this podcast will do that, as well as ours, the Will and Dave show. It's me and my son. He's young. He's a liberal or progressive, as he puts it. I'm older and a conservative and way more right-wing than he is. And we seldom agree on anything. And yet at the end of the show, we really like each other still, and it's a miracle. So if you're interested in something else, it would be the Will and Dave show, where all podcasts are found. So there's my plug.
It is a good show. What's the tagline? It's different opinions, but still friends. Or what?
Yep.
I can't remember. Yep.
I don't know what the tagline. It changes from week to week.
That was the one that really resonated with me, and I enjoyed it. So
yeah.
If you're listening to this, we've got a visual show companion. If you want to see some of the memes or the post, you can find that at cringepost.com. Just click on the link to the visual show companion. And likewise, if you're a fan of the show or if you're enjoying what we're doing, please give us a like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out. Before we get into other people's cringe takes, we like to poke fun at ourselves because we don't want to throw rocks from glass houses. We want to show that everyone can live, learn, and grow. And Dave, like I said, or he said earlier, tried to kill us at his house a couple times, which makes me question whether he actually likes my band or not. So we thought, hey, Dave can tell his cringe story in my place today. So go for it, Dave. Tell us about how you've tried to ruin my band before.
Well, first off, I want to say that you're not as active in the band anymore, and I'm not happy about that, as I have a vested interest in you winning a Grammy.
Yes.
And it's hard to do that if you don't play as much. So you have to keep playing, Britt. So don't stop playing your guitar and flying off the stage and doing all the things that you do.
For those of you, and I'll make this known publicly, I promised Dave I would thank him in my Grammy speech if I ever won one. So,
yes. So a few years ago, I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago, you and the band were here in Spokane. You're here overnight, and we opened our house up, and you came over and you visited. And our parents, I say our parents, your parents were gone, and Susan was gone, so it was you and me late at night one night. You were singing the next morning, and I kept you up to like 3 in the morning. Your voice was shot the next day, and it's like, this is not going to go well. And so that evening, we're sort of relaxing after the show, and I was going to cook some hamburgers or steaks on the barbecue, and we go through the evening, we're talking, and I forgot about the fact that I had a handle of a what's called a spatula, and it was on the barbecue, and all of a sudden the house is filled with these these filaments of plastic that I'm sure were carcinogenic, and I'm sure that all of your lives are shorter by about 15 years because of all the carcinogenic plastic in the house, because it filled the house. And then the next morning or that evening, I can't remember when it was, I made a batch of pancakes. And your brother is deathly allergic to nuts, I believe, or something that was
Yes.
in the pancakes. And right as he was starting to eat, or he took a bite, and I can't remember, but something went wrong. And we're like, uh-oh, what did you cook, Dave? And I'm like, pancakes with oatmeal or something in them. And so, yes, I may or may not have tried to wreck the future of becoming Bristol all in one short weekend.
Yes, yes. The one with my brother specifically was pretty funny because he's deathly allergic to peanuts, and we've had a few
Yeah.
times where we've promoters given us like a granola bar or something. He's eaten it, and then we've got the EpiPen shot, got to stab it into his thigh. And so I took a bite. I think this is how it was. It was either him or I
Yes.
took a bite of the pancake, and I was like, "Oh, something tastes different about this." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, Jack, you can't eat peas." Luckily, he was fine, right?
Yes.
And despite your attempts to kill us, and despite all of those things, we still decided to come back, and you were gracious enough to host us many times.
Well, it's sort of like me and Will on our show. I'm just surprised you still like us, that you still come visit, because every time you come through town, I get a call and said, "Hey, Dave, do you want to kill us again?" You know,
Yeah. It's Stockholm syndrome, man. It's just that's what it is.
There we go. There you go. So yeah,
Awesome.
so that is our cringy moment.
Yes, yes. Dave, the serial killer.
I have one
Not
more,
yet.
actually, if you don't mind.
Go for it. Yes, go for it.
I have one more. It's a short one. It's how we met.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good one. Yeah.
You were at our church. We were playing at our church. And I had met you. I had no idea who you were. And you were up on the stage. You're setting up. I had keys or something for the room. So I'm at the back of the stage. And so I go up to your dad, who's at the back of the stage. And I said, how do you pay for all this stuff? Like, out of the blue, I just walk up. How do you pay for all this equipment? And he looks at me, and you looked at me, and you said, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
Nosy Dave.
Yeah. Well, I was just we showed up, because we would bring our own sound equipment. So we kind of subscribe to this, like, hey, we're gonna have a band in a box. We'll roll up with all of our own sound, all of our own lights, and everything. And so we rolled up to your church and pulled in, and we were unloading, and I think we were probably 2/3 of the way through a 3-month tour at that point. So we were pretty tired. And I just remember there's this guy looking at me as I'm setting up lights. He's like, how do you pay for this stuff? It's like not even a, hey, I'm Dave. It's almost like it felt like a stranger coming into your house and saying, how much did you pay for this house? It's just like, and little did I know that you were also
right, we were Bill.
Go for it.
We were your billet. We were your
Yes.
billet, right? Yes.
Yep. And you guys you made us all food, and you were also the place we were staying at. So I guess you had some claim there. Yeah, that was a nice start to a good friendship, though, man. It's been a good time.
Yes, it has. It's lasted for a number of years. I'm happy it did.
Me too. All right, moving on to other people's cringe posts. The first one we've got is by this gal named Jo Lueman. I think that's how you say her name. I'm not sure. But she's a self-proclaimed pastor, and she tweeted out, I would rather get an abortion than have a brown child who ends up being adopted by white evangelicals. It is not a kindness to children of the global majority to give them to people who will traumatize them with self and ancestral hatred. An abortion is an act of love. And when I first saw this, I couldn't believe it. I thought it had to be satire, and then I went and looked through her feed, and it's not. She's not joking at all. She's quite serious. And what really got me was that she admits that these children, right? Like the strongest argument against abortion is that they're not a child, right, in the womb. Because then it's like, okay, then it is maybe some parasite or whatever. I think it's pretty clear that it is a child. But she even grants that premise, right? She says, this is a child. They are in the womb. They are alive. And because I hate white people and white evangelicals so much, and I think they're so awful, it would be better for a brown child who's born into poverty or is in need or needs to be adopted from some other country to be killed rather than be placed with them. And I thought that was just a really awful thing. And this line of reasoning, right, that it's better for someone to be dead than to be alive, I think really leads to a lot of really nasty conclusions. I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
Well, I'm actually, as we speak, I'm going to her feed, And she's a white woman, is she not?
I think she's Colombian.
Is she Colombian? Okay.
Yeah.
I, I, we're going to agree on a lot of things today, I think, here, Brett. And so it's hard for me to read these and not get worked up, because I am the worst of all of these things. I'm white, I'm old, I'm male, and I'm an evangelical. And so I don't have a whole lot to say unless I disagree, which I'd have to go back and shoot myself.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I read this and I think she's really upset at me.
Yeah.
And I like to think I'm a nice guy, but apparently I traumatize everybody who's not like me. And I don't think I do, except for members of the band Becoming Bristol. But other than that, I think I'm a pretty nice guy. And I sort of take offense because I am who she's talking to.
Yep. And you have some work within, I know, in that space, and I know a lot of other families that have adopted children that were very much less than desirable, right? They had some sort of genetic defect. There was probably half a dozen families back in my hometown, some white, some not, that were adopting children from China that were mainly girls, right? That were kind of discarded because they're not desirable, or they had like a cleft lip or something like that. And so I've only ever known, and I'm sure there's plenty of abuse, right, that occurs with kids that are adopted and things like that. But for every case of that instance, there's plenty of other cases where people are doing really, really good things, right? These children that would have been killed, were undesirable and left for dead, were adopted, and they're way better off because of it. And to say that it would be an act of love to have someone not exist, right, rather than exist, it's such a twisting of truth, right? It's almost, when I read it, it just seemed like gaslighting, and it made me think that this was satirical, but it's not. And I think it all stems from the left's view, because this gal's pretty lefty,
right?
The left's view that the only truth is power, right? The only type of thing that I want to have happen is my desired outcome, and whatever argument gets me towards my desired outcome, which is the ability to kill who I want, is the argument they're going to make. And this inevitably, I don't know if you ever read like the book Winter Flight, but it very much reminds me of that, right? It's like, hey, we have people that are going to suck up resources or whatever, and I want to be able to justify to kill them. And that's kind of where this eventually leads.
It is. I have an issue with abortion at the root level, so I won't even go there, because I think anybody who is an evangelical or who is right of center has an issue with abortion on a lot of levels. But to call it an act of love really is pushing the boundaries. It's going all the way extreme. And these are the people who I think hurt either cause, are the extremes of any view. It's one thing if on the argument of abortion, there's arguments, in the case of rape, or in the case of if it be illness or the health of the mother. And those are things I can have a conversation about. But to have a conversation and your opening statement is an abortion as an act of love is hard to start a conversation. And I think it hurts her argument if she begins there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess if you want to steel man it, right? Because that's what we try and do here is like, even no matter how ridiculous the take is, like what's the strongest version of this argument? I mean, you could say that, like, okay, the only reason white evangelicals want to adopt from, a foreign country is so that they can, teach that kid's culture is bad and that they should be more white, kind of hearkening back to like what the books like White Fragility, which teaches that, things like being on time or being productive are, white structures of power to, enforce their supremacy on the world. But even then, it's like the strongest argument for what she's saying is still a weak argument in and of itself, right? Like I don't subscribe to White Fragility or any of those concepts, right? That like universal laws of reality, right? Like if you do work, like things happen. Like that those don't exist, and those are aspects of white supremacy.
It's It's the argument, that math is racist, and all these, they take an idea of where you can have a conversation on racism or on things like that, and they go to the extreme where there is no conversation, and so I can't. It isn't even like, for me, it's just wrong. I can't even have a conversation about it with
Yeah.
somebody of that side. I have to bring them a little bit into the middle and look for common ground. And I can't find any in this tweet. I
Yeah.
am white and I am an evangelical, and you're saying that all I will do is I traumatize anybody I come in contact with self and ancestral hatred, and it simply isn't true. So
Yeah.
how do you begin there? So,
And that's kind of the irony of it, right?
Yeah.
Which is she actually puts self and ancestral hatred
Yes.
onto you. She says you must feel this, right? Because
Yes.
of your skin color, which is kind of ironic.
So, Joe, if you ever hear this, I don't agree with you, but I'd love to have a conversation with you and meet you somewhere in the middle.
Something tells me she probably won't want to.
I may reach out to her on Twitter.
Go for it, man.
Yeah.
Let me know how it goes.
Oh, I will. Trust me.
All right. Moving on to our next one.
Yes.
So I don't know if we mentioned this earlier, but Dave has quite a bit of a history up there in Canada, and so I wanted to get some Canadian takes today. And the first we're going to take on, so Senator Marsha Blackburn tweeted out, Biden said today he's doing everything within his power to lower gas prices. If that were true, he would have restarted the Keystone pipeline by now. And then a user replied, dirty oil going over watersheds that supply clean drinking water and water for crops is less important to you than to us. We can live without gasoline since we are switching more to electric each year. So how much you going to make, Marsha? Inferring that she is getting paid by, advocating for the Keystone pipeline. I'll let you take the majority of this one, but what really got me was the, we can live without gasoline line. There is no way. If you took if you took us all off gasoline, there would be a lot of people dead in a relatively short amount of time. And these people, if you ask them, like, how does electricity made? Like, they have no idea, right? They have no idea about the concept of like a power plant, or that it's like, hey, like you actually have to generate enough energy to move something, to make that energy. And your electric thing that your electric car that you plug into your garage, is fed by some sort of fossil fuel, more than likely. So I'll let you take it on, because you're from Canada and you've got some roots in the oil and gas industry.
Well, number one, I agree with the reply only on the final sentence of the reply. How much you going to make, Marsha? Is I have no love for politicians, and I'm sure she's making a bundle. And so I absolutely agree with the final sentence on that. I'm not a fan of politicians, and you know that. We've had lots of conversations about that. The XL pipeline is its own animal, and it is. For most of my life, I worked in the oil and gas industry, and the XL pipeline, if you're an American, is a wonderful thing. Is what you do is you go to Canada and you say, hey, I will buy all your oil at a discount. I'll build a pipeline. I'll go down to Louisiana with that oil, and I'll go on the world market and I will sell it on a markup. And that's what the XL pipeline is. It is not oil for the U.S. It's oil for the world market, and the U.S. is not getting any of it. It simply is a moneymaker for the oil companies in the U.S. It's not going to help, like anything to do with the price of gas at the gas pumps. And if you're a Canadian and you're listening to this, say no to XL Pipeline, because you guys need to get your oil out to your own coast and don't ship it to Louisiana at a discount. You're foolish to do that. Hold the oil in your country and you sell it on the world market. Ignore the U.S. Now, as for the price at the pumps, yes, it's high. It's high every summer, and it's higher this year. But it has nothing to do really with the pipelines. It has to do with the commodities and how they are marketed and sold.
Yes. Ignore
the pipelines, if you will, and look at the price of oil in 2004. It was at $212 a barrel, and we were at $4 a gallon-ish. And now we're at $98 a gallon, and we're almost at $5 a gallon. It is not rational. It is It's all in the, it's all in the it's all in the marketing of the commodities, and oil and gasoline are wholly different commodities. And there really is not a whole lot of correlation anymore in between the two.
Yes.
And I hate the price of gas, but it's not the XL pipeline. And Marcia, there's lots of reasons you can hate Biden. I don't think that this is one of them. Except as an American, I want the XL pipeline because it makes American companies money, and I own a few shares in them. Except as a Canadian, say no to Keystone.
I like that insight into it, and I think my biggest issue with the reply to Marcia is like this view about pipelines and their effects on the environment, right? Because it's like okay, you can send all this oil from Canada down to Louisiana, and people are going to move commodities one way or the other, right? They're going to move it through a pipeline, or they're going to load it up onto a truck and they're going to drive it down to Louisiana, right? One way or the other. It might not be at the same scale, but it's going to be less efficient, right? So if you really want to like reduce environmental impact and different things, in fact, there's less, based on my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are less accidents with pipelines than there are with like trucks spilling and car accidents and things like that are transporting and trains with gas and things like that. And then especially if you add in, stuff like like the actual emissions from these vehicles that they're putting them out as they're being shipped all over the place.
I didn't even know that was a conversation. Of course, if you take the same oil and you put it in a semi truck or a train, or you put it in a pipeline, which one is creating more CO2 and more of these harmful emissions? Hello. I mean, whoever it was who replied, I can't see.
Yeah, we black it out because they're not verified.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we keep them anonymous.
Oh, you're so nice. If they're on Twitter, I don't think they should be anonymous. But if it's not even an argument, it shouldn't make sense. I mean, I think if you're going to cringe, it should be over Marcia, and the other one, I'm just. I agree.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of Marsha Blackburn either. I think that's why they're both on here. Right? I didn't just put the one.
Yeah.
There's this like belief too that like that it's because of like Russia's war with Ukraine that gas prices are high and everything. And it's like, no, gas prices are high, one, because we've been printing stuff, right? There's not been a reduction in the supply of any of these things, right? What will happen is like Russia says, hey, I'm not going to sell to whoever, and then ships that were going one way flip around and come back the other way. And the only reason commodity prices would go up from like something like that is if Russia blew up all of the oil refineries or gas, the supply of gas, right? And there was 50% less gas than there was prior to that. The same amount of gas is getting out into the world. It's now just being shifted around. So this is just like, we talk about this all the time. Like what makes things cringe, and this is what makes Marsha's tweet cringe, is that people will say things not because they are true. They will say them because they want to have some sort of power, or they want some sort of leverage over someone, or it's a way to slam dunk on someone.
Yes.
Instead of using they're using their speech to get what they want, as opposed to unveiling and trying to understand what's true.
Right.
And so that's why I thought both of these was pretty funny, right? They both miss each other too, which is hilarious, right? Like one of them's approaching it from like, hey, we need to protect the U.S. interests in gasoline, right. And then the other's like, well, we need to protect the environment. It's like they're talk about the same thing at least.
The thing with Biden is, or with responding to Biden in this manner, is I don't think that he woke up early enough to read this tweet. He was still asleep when this went out.
Yeah.
I mean, he probably is still asleep now. So it completely went over his head. And for the reply, when you're talking about environment and you're talking to an environmentalist are full of, or are you talking about a politician? Politicians are full of BS anyways. They're great for the environment. That's all they're full of. It's fertilizer all over the place. So let's not get upset at a politician for the environment, because they're doing everything they can. They're so full of BS. Just spread them over a field and you'll have the greenest planet in the world. I'm sorry. Did I go overboard?
No, you didn't. You're all right. We got to water that tree of liberty.
Spread some politicians around.
Oh, yes. Oh, man, we're going to get taken off YouTube. All right, moving on to our next one. And this made me think of a story you told me about one of your sons. I think he like broke a bone or something. But this person tweeted out, the U.S. GDP is 20 times Canada's, but they have free healthcare and we don't.
Oh, you're going to get me going on this one.
Oh yes, I'm excited for it. This we talked about it on a different show, but I remember when people were making fun of Rand Paul for going up to Canada for because he had some sort of surgery after his neighbor assaulted him. And people were making fun of like, oh, you went up to Canada for, to use that dreaded socialized healthcare. It's like, no, when you actually look at it, he went to one of the only clinics that had been grandfathered into being privatized, and it had maintained being one of the best like clinics for the type of procedure he was having. So it's actually a point in the opposite direction. But you're way more familiar with it, and I have more personal anecdotes on it. So give us what you got.
Well, the word in the middle is wrong because it's not free. Look at their tax rates. And anybody who makes any money in Canada, your tax rate will begin at about 38%, and it maxes out at about 48% of your income. It's not free. I don't care how you look at it, it's not free. So let's just ignore the middle word. It's not free. It also, so in the case of Rand Paul, who went up, and I don't know anything about the story, except if you're not a resident and you go into Canada and you need an operation, it is more expensive than what it is here in the U.S. So he paid more in Canada for anything than he would have here, even for dollar. As it's anybody who comes in with money, they say, "Ooh, an American with money, we're going to charge him more." It's sort of an American tax, and they just mark it up. So it was not at a discount, and it for sure was not free. Now he might have got a kickback for making the news, and they got some free headlines out of it, but he's a politician, so we sort of expect that. Read the first segment to get there.
I love it.
But healthcare. So the story I told you was actually my brother-in-law. My brother was one, my brother-in-law was another one. So it was my brother. He hurt his shoulder. Went to the doctor, and they said, yeah, we've got to do an operation on your shoulder. And he said, great. So he said, how long is the wait? And he said, it's about 8 months.
Oh my gosh.
So he said, okay, are you going to call me, remind me in 8 months I have to come for surgery? He said, yeah. So a year later, he hadn't got a call. So he called him up and said, hey, I need surgery on my shoulder. I'm still all buggered up. And they said, oh yeah, we need to get you in. And he said, why don't you come in and we'll do an inspection on your shoulder? So he goes in, he said, yeah, we got to get you in. It'll be another 6 months. So he went in at about the 3-month mark after that, and they're going to do another inspection. They said, oh yeah, the scar tissue is too big. We can't do the surgery. So he has never had any surgery on his shoulder as it took too long to get the surgery. It's not free. It's not good. It's not helpful. It's Canadian. And I love Canadians, but it doesn't work. Now, I will say this. American healthcare is no better. It's more expensive. It's insurance company run. It's horribly expensive if you are on an entry-level income. And I get the pain of the American system. But it doesn't mean that up in Canada, it's way better. It just means it's in your taxes and not out of your paycheck. Does that make sense?
Yep. And I think one of the things I can't remember, there's like 3 aspects, right, that you can have with healthcare, which is like availability, affordability, and then like quality, right? And like one of those, that's like any free market, right? One of those can tend to suffer depending on how the market kind of addresses it. And in America, one of the things that's great is we do have availability, right? Like if I remember I got COVID back in December, and we were having a short of monoclonal antibodies, and I was like, hey, like I want to actually know what I can do, right? If this turns for the worst, I have a little bit of asthma, but just want to make sure, I know my options if I start feeling really, really bad. And even though there was a shortage of monoclonal antibodies in Washington, there was a company that had a reserve stockpile, and you could get it. You'd have to just pay $10,000, to get it. But essentially, like if worse came to worse and my life was in danger, there was a price I could pay to save it, right? Whereas like with your brother, or brother-in-law, whoever it was with the shoulder, like there was no price he could pay, and his shoulder sealed up, and now he has to live with a limited mobility and limited use on functionality, which is a big bummer.
Yes.
And that fits with a lot of my other Canadian friends, right? Like my other Canadian friends are like, yeah, like you can get healthcare in Canada, but because it's free,
Yep.
quote unquote, that means that everyone tries to use it and there's no actual rationality to the market or actual balances. And so then the supply is basically choked all the way. And which means that you have a lot of wait times, and it's kind of pick your poison. When you think about like in the United States, when you look at the medical procedures that have been, because people say, well, how will deregulation, solve this? And if you look at the procedures like LASIK eye surgery, areas that have been really, really deregulated over the past few years, you have cheaper procedures. They're way more efficient, and they're also way more available. Like you could go in the next week and go get LASIK eye surgery, and it'd be done pretty safely, very safely, for a very affordable price tomorrow if you wanted to. And so that's kind of, to me, we're a pretty libertarian leaning podcast here. Our solution is like, let's just deregulate and let people make the choices that they want.
Right. So as you're talking, I'm going and I'm looking at the BC government in Canada. The BC government, there's a website for their surgery wait times. And if you want to know how free their healthcare is, if you go to that website, it's easy. Just have to Google. I'll Google for BC surgery wait times. It's painful. It's over a year for some things, and it.
Oh my gosh!
And it's not free.
Let's do open heart surgery here. So in open heart surgery, you got 420 cases open, and it is about half a year for 90% for you to get. Oh my goodness!
This is the government's own website that's saying, yeah, you're going to wait for 6 months. Like, it's not free. It's not free, and they acknowledge that they suck at it. So.
Yeah, that's a great. I'll link to that in the show notes page so people can go explore that and see that alone should be a way to shut down an argument on that. That's crazy.
It often isn't, but it should be. What?
All right, moving on to. Oh, sorry. Go. I was
just going to ask what the next one is because I think we debunked that one.
We debunked that one. You could have just said that at the top, and we would have been fine. Yeah, we could have saved time. All right. So we've got a tweet by Peter Dow, I think is how you say his name. And he tweets out, imagine having enough wealth to single-handedly end hunger on Earth and choosing to build spaceships instead. Imagine being able to house every homeless person, but waking up every day and choosing not to. There should be no such thing as a billionaire. And I know you have some, we've taken on similar tweets to this one in the past. And, everyone knows the story about Elon Musk going to the World Health Organization saying, hey, I'll give you $6 billion if you can provide an accounting statement of how you'll use it to end world hunger. And then they never do provide the accounting statement. But I wanted, you and Will, I know, have had conversations on this, and I'd love to hear your guys' perspective on it.
Well, if you want to hear his, you'll have to have him on the show, because he agrees there should be nobody who has more than $1 billion. And anybody who has more than $1 billion should give it all away. Or the government should take it. I disagree because if somebody has earned $1 billion or a million billion, I don't know what that is, it doesn't matter. It is his money. We shouldn't take it. I do think, and this is where I go a little bit on the middle of the road. I think if you have a lot of money, you ought to do good. So I think there's a moral requirement, I think, and not a legal requirement, a moral requirement, that he who has a lot ought to help a lot. And that comes down to you and me and how we live. But it shouldn't be the government that takes it, for sure, as there is no more inefficient machine on the planet than any federal government. So for them to take it is an absolute waste. I think, though, that they help the world a lot. If you look at Musk, I think he does help the world. Look at Bill Gates. I know he helps hunger around the world. He gives away lots of money. He also makes lots of money. It's in one hand out the other. And if it's not employees It's all the people he feeds in Africa. There's an argument on Gates that he also is in charge of the Illuminati and he's killing us all through the vaccines.
Yeah.
And I don't go there because I don't agree with it, but they do help people a lot. And I just think it's not as obvious as when you have a billionaire who walks up and said, "Hey, I'll buy a company for $44 billion," and like, but you shouldn't have that much money. Well, sure, you should.
Yeah, I mean, who's to say what? And I like your point about like there is a moral, like to he who has much, you should give a lot, right? And that's a heart of generosity, and that's a good thing. But the question is, can the government make you a better person? And I don't think anyone, as much as everyone loves certain things about the government and thinks they can maybe provide healthcare, I think everyone can agree that the government can't make people better people. That is the least likely thing to happen for the government to be involved in. And your point about Bill Gates, and we've talked about it on the show, but Bill Gates has done more good for the world by inventing Microsoft and Office 365 and all the suite of business tools than his foundation would ever do in all of his lifetimes, right? The ability for a business to have Microsoft Excel and to write their ideas down in Microsoft Word and then to run their accounting on Microsoft Excel and to make different types of businesses. You know how many businesses are built off of Microsoft's platform? Like basically every business is built off of that platform. And so you can directly attribute so much economic growth, so many families being fed, so many different types of innovations that have made the world better to the existence of Microsoft. And I would propose that someone having billions of dollars is not a sign of how much they have taken from people, but it's how much they've actually given. Right? The greatest fortunes in the world the greatest fortunes are made not by taking money from people or by charging a lot for services. It's by making services way more valuable, by reducing their costs, making them easier to obtain, making it more widely available to people. And so, and the other aspect of it too, right, is that like these people think that if you just had $6 billion and you dropped it in the middle of a field in Africa, world hunger would be solved. It's like, that's not how it works, right? There's so much infrastructure and people and thought and innovation that must go into that. Bill Gates has that, it's like, hey, we're going to generate power by using, the human waste that people deposit every day. Right. Like that's innovation, right? You got to figure out those type of things. And that's only possible by people that have accumulated billions of dollars reinvesting it.
Right. I agree with you. And I think that, in order to reach those ideas, you have to really look through the news and look at the people in behind the news. If I read the headline and say he spent $44 billion on something, it's easy to get angry. But you need it's sort of like it's a toddler who says, "I want a cookie, I want a cookie, I want a cookie." He doesn't want to make the cookie. He doesn't want to do the work to make the cookie. He doesn't want to do anything. He's not able to, as he doesn't have the knowledge. And I think that the people who say, I want the $44 billion, they have no idea how to make $44 billion. All they want is the $44 billion.
Yeah.
And I think anybody who knows how to make money is going to understand that, hey, I could make $44 billion and then I don't need his.
Yes.
And that is,
that's a fantastic point.
This. So, Peter, I hate to call you a toddler, but I just did.
Yeah. If you, the only person that is qualified to figure out how to spend $44 billion is the one that is qualified to make it, or has proven that they can make it.
You got it.
It's a great point. Great point. All right. Moving on to our last one of the day. We've got an image of some empty shelves in a grocery store. And this gal named Bess Bell tweets out a picture and says, "The formula shortage is an example of how free market capitalism does exactly what right-wing fearmongers think socialism will do." And this one really got me, man, because to look at the baby formula industry and the market and to think that is, the pinnacle, the shining example of free market capitalism in the United States is just laughable. What about it is free market, right? You've got three players that make up 90% of the market. You've got government protectionism. You've got heavy government regulation, which, by the way, didn't actually, all this regulation to keep it safe, didn't actually prevent, babies dying from a plant that wasn't up to code. They actually buried it for months because they were so embarrassed about it. And then you've got states and interstate tariffs on baby formula, and it's heavily regulated by the government. What about that is capitalism? That there's nothing free market about it. What do you think?
Well, that's an easy answer. I agree. This shelf, the picture of the shelf, it could be taken out of any socialist country. No bread on the shelves, no water on the shelves, no milk in the cooler. It just is in a place where there is a shortage of baby food. And, I sort of have this, it's a red herring to me. And we look at these issues and they pop up in the news and everybody gets angry about them. And it's not an easy fix. And it is not a capitalism or socialism argument. It's a people argument. It's a government argument. As you said, it is heavily regulated. It is heavily managed at the government level, which is the most inefficient organization on the planet. And we expect it to run well. Well, hello. I mean, I feel like like the show in Back to the Future, McFly. Is anybody home, McFly? It's not. It shouldn't really be hard to understand why this is happening. It's the government involvement. Is they regulate it, they walked in and they shut it down, and then they said it's not going to. It really is socialism at the root of it. It is right now.
Yes,
it is right now. So
yes, yeah, and what's funny to me is that their solution to solving this baby formula crisis is to have free market capitalism, right? Like they've deregulated, they've allowed imports from European countries of baby formula, which they previously did not allow. Right. And guess what? The reason they didn't allow it was because you've got lobbyists from these three big companies paying a bunch of money to make sure that we outlaw baby formula that's just as good. It's just as safe. It's acceptable in all the European first world countries. It might have some weird technicality in the labeling that doesn't allow it to be shipped over here. But because they want to protect these industries and they put a tariff of 17% on imported baby formula, when this did strike, there was no way to actually replenish that supply, right? I think it was Abbott or whatever the company's name was, makes up 40%. 40% of the baby formula in the U.S. is given by them. And so you shut them down, it's like, you're going to have that. Yeah. And I didn't realize, I don't have kids yet, but I didn't realize, man, how important baby formula was, right? Like there's not, it's not like you can just give a baby applesauce, right? Like when they need to eat, like there's very specific things. And so and for something that important to be so regulated like that, I think just shows the holes that occur. And like you're saying, this is socialism at the root of it, right? And ironically, the antidote to it is they're giving it more free market capitalism.
Oh man, you're going to make all those people mad. I'm sorry.
It's okay. That's what we're here for, Dave. We take on the cringe. That's what we do.
It's hard for me.
Do you have any more on this one? Oh, go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
It's just hard for me to understand where their angle is on this, as it's hard to make this argument and make it. It's just hard for me to understand. I don't get it.
It is hard because it's all you have to do is ask, well, what about what's going on right now is free market capitalism? And maybe someone listening to the show doesn't agree with us, and maybe they can, submit on our Instagram page or via email or whatever, what you think, because we'd love to hear the argument. But I just don't see how. I guess maybe if you want to steelman it, you could say this is crony capitalism, right? Because you got a company using the levers of government to kind of gain a monopoly. But that's not free market capitalism. That's still crony. So I agree with you. It's kind of a rough one, and it's meant to be. These type of takes are the reason we kind of have all this stuff going on. I think I've lost Dave, unfortunately, but the reason we have the show, right, is to demonstrate that these type of things that you might take at face value when they show up on your feed. We want to point out where they're wrong, right? Because you might see this and you might be like, well, there must be something to that. At face value, it makes sense. But what we're trying to do is show, hey, there's actually some underlying assumptions here that don't actually work. So yeah, I don't know if Dave's going to come back or not, but we really appreciate having him on. If you want to check out his stuff, you just can go to the Will and Dave Show. I think it's just thewillanddaveshow.com. Check them out on all their podcasts. They got a really great show, and Dave's a great guy. And like I said at the beginning, if you like our show, please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll catch you next time.